All right, another episode of the More To It podcast. I'm the host, John Moore. We're at Hail Varsity magazine, hailvarsity.com, and I am pleased to be joined by my man, Mr. Brandon Vogel. Vogues, how you doing today, my man?
I'm doing well.
Good.
We're gonna have some football, believe it or not. So that's a good
right.
thing.
We the last time we talked, I think we recorded about a couple months ago, I think, and we kind of did a position breakdown. At that time, we were about 99.9% positive we were going to have football. And obviously that took a complete U-turn on us. But we got it back. You go back to over a month ago, August 11th, this thing was canceled. Kevin Warren said this is not going to be addressed. And all of a sudden, here we are getting football in, almost a month now, end of October. What is your emotions, your predictions, the roller coaster ride that we've been taking on this last month, the Big Ten? What was that like for you?
Yeah, it was pretty strange. So to think back, I think that was like an early August podcast, and we were talking about how football's so big, it just means so much to these communities, and not just in an emotional sense, but a financial sense, that we both felt pretty confident they were going to play, and then it started to turn. And after the decision, I was kind of like, well, that's that. And Nebraska and some other parent groups and some other schools got involved. I mean, Nebraska was clearly the kind of the one that was out there in front the most in terms of applying pressure. And I think when you added that to just the developments in rapid testing, you started to have a path forward. And since then, since the Big Ten has jumped back in, you're seeing almost every other conference out there is trying to get back in. So it's been a crazy time. That the day they announced it, it was weird. I felt more relief than I guess I did joy that football was going to be back. It was just like, okay, finally, like at least there's a decision, a new decision. We know what's going on. It was a long 30 or so days there.
Yeah. When you look at it, do you think the Big Ten was banking on, hey, everyone is going to follow our lead? If they cancel, the Pac-10 will follow. They, I guess, assume that the other major three conferences would do the same?
I think so. I don't think it was the reason they made the decision, but I think they were probably surprised when no one other than the Pac-12, at least at the power level, kind of jumped in the boat with them. And as games started, I mean, the pressure, from the schools that definitely wanted to play started right away after the decision. But I think seeing games being played, seeing how it's happening, and then, some developments on the medical side all kind of created okay, we gotta think about this again and see what we can actually do here. So
yeah, it's funny looking at it now. I mean, Frost comes out August 10th with the press conference. Obviously really adamant in other economies and in the Big Ten and then you get the immediate, obviously the pushback then from the Desmond Howards, the Will Bonds, and then it's just kind of funny. And then Ryan Day comes out and makes his comments, and that's Ohio State kind of gets a pass. But even we have it now, and we have the schedule, and which we're going to discuss here for the next 30-45 minutes. And obviously, Nebraska's schedule was going to be hard back in September if they would have started with a normal schedule. And it's still hard, but now it's still almost like people are, Nebraska, this is what you get for trying to, push the bear, or if, deal with the bull, now you're going to get the horns. And just that narrative, even watching college football last night, talking about on halftime shows, it's like they want to get back in Nebraska somehow and all this. But it's like, God dang, guys, I don't think if Nebraska doesn't put their foot forward, we probably don't have football to some extent. And I think that's kind of funny how Nebraska's just it's kind of still been the punching bag here for the last month or so.
Yeah, it's been tough, and it's a good reminder, both with kind of how Frost's comments, I think, were perceived in the days that followed. On the day of, it was like, oh, great, here's a coach standing up for his guys, and he, Frost knew his stuff. He made compelling case for here's why I think it's safer for our players to, have games, have kind of that carrot on the stick of you got to be smart. That all makes sense, but in the days after the Big Ten's decision, it kind of got conflated into, oh, Nebraska's threatening to leave, which Frost made mention of. We would try and find some games, but never. It wasn't a threat. I mean, it was the day before the the announcement of the cancellation even. And then, in the post-schedule release, AD Bill Moose kind of came out and expressed his disappointment, which didn't help with that. But it's just kind of important to remember. Derek Peterson has a really great column on the site right now about this, about how that gets conflated to, because Bill Moose expressed, I really wanted to like tear up the initial schedule and kind of build a new one. Because, as you mentioned, the initial schedule for Nebraska was tough. It was tough when it was 12 games. Cincinnati came out their first game of the season and just rolled over Austin Peay, which, it's an FCS school, but they looked good. They were on Nebraska's schedule. Ohio State, Penn State were always on the schedule. So, Moose comes out and says what he says, and credit to him for being honest about it. But you saw then, if you were watching games that night of the announcement, that during the halftime show, they're talking about it. It's like, oh, Nebraska's not happy. It's like, well, it's not, one person from Nebraska said that. And now he happens to be the athletic director. But it's just, and that's how college football is. You always get painted with a pretty broad brush. When a Florida State fan does something silly, it's like, oh, look at Florida State.
Right.
But yeah, it's been a tiring, I guess, month. So it'll be good to finally get some games going again.
Right.
Be able to focus on that.
I've been happy playing Ohio State, Wisconsin, Penn State, Michigan, like 2 times. I mean, I would take any football at this time. But I look at their schedule, and you look at Ohio State, Wisconsin, Northwestern, Penn State, Illinois, Iowa, Purdue, Minnesota. Like, we hope there's going to be 8 games. There's strong potential that not all 14 Big Ten schools will play all 8 or maybe the 9 games. But you look at the schedule, and I look, okay, who really wanted to play out of this schedule? Because I think that gives you a good idea. If those schools really wanted to play football, they're probably going to take a little extra care, those extra steps to making sure their players are going about and doing the right things, and that you don't have, the 5% caseloads or it goes into that 7% of the population caseloads to where football does get canceled. So when I look at the schedule, I'm like, I'm actually really happy. I'm not really super concerned with looking at this. If we had Rutgers, I'd be really concerned. If we had Maryland, I'd be really concerned. If we had Michigan State, I'd be really concerned, because I don't think for sure those 3 schools didn't want to play football. I look at who we have. I'm like, I think I can look at this, hopefully fingers crossed. I'm pretty confident all 8 teams want to play football, and they're going to do the necessary things to make sure that football is played.
Yeah, and Ohio State and Penn State obviously have a big incentive, an incentive that's just not there for Rutgers or maybe even a Michigan State, which is a good football program. It's just a year one, it was going to be rough regardless, and then they haven't been able to, they didn't have that spring, which is so essential when you have a new coach to just get things installed. You don't have that with Ohio State and Penn State. The virus is the virus, and you hope you can control it. Penn State's had to pause a little bit, but the incentive to play is definitely there for the teams that Nebraska drew. So that's a good silver lining to this. And I'm kind of in the same boat you are. I'm like, it's pretty much what I thought it was going to be once we knew they were basing it off of that initial 10-game schedule. Ohio State was their kind of permanent crossover for a good 6-year stretch, so you figure that one would stay. Penn State was their only cross-division home game, so unless you're going to tear up the entire thing, those were probably the 2 most likely. Those are the 2 Nebraska got. I think it's I'd be interested in what you think about this. I think it's better to draw those teams early than late.
Absolutely.
And, you'll take your shot. It's a weird year. It's going to be chaotic, I think. I mean, Ohio State's going to be really damn good still. They are. But, it's just everything's out of the norm. So who knows really what's going to happen? And for a team like Nebraska that was still trying to climb up, I think that can be more to their advantage than a disadvantage.
Yeah, getting the best teams early on that's when you want them. I think Ohio State's kind of had a history of struggling early on in the year. You look back, I think just 2 years ago, I think they almost got beat by Cincinnati at home. That was a 38-34 game. You go back to their 2014 season when they win the national championship, they lose to Virginia Tech, who wasn't a great football team that year either, or like the first or second game of the year at Columbus. Ohio State's always kind of stubbed their toe, but then Urban Meyer, being the good coach he was at the time, he gets things changed around rather quickly. So I'm happy. Like, listen, I would have been happy playing the freaking Chicago Bears by game one. Like, I'm just happy we're playing football. I don't care who we play. I like our schedule. I mean, that's great. You want to play the best teams, and we're going to get the best teams other than probably Michigan out of the East. So let's get down into it. So Ohio State, October 24th, an 11 a.m. kick on Fox out in Columbus. Ohio State brings back damn near everyone offensively. Obviously, Justin Fields. They get Trey Sermon, the transfer running back out of Oklahoma. But the biggest question marks defensively for Ohio State. You lose, obviously, multiple first-round picks, Okudah, Chase Young. You bring some, obviously, it's just plug and replace. But if there's any way you could potentially get Ohio State this year, is Nebraska's offense is going to be, in my opinion, the best it's going to be going in year three, having a 3-year starting quarterback, best offensive line setup they've had going forward. You get some weapons. So who knows first game, but hey, let's play the top dogs right out the gate.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think defensively, and it looks like Ohio State's going to get Sean Wade, who opted out, and is back in. That's big. Because you mentioned some of those guys, like in addition to Chase Young, their secondary is always good. And getting Wade back helps with that. Zach Harrison's kind of the next guy up on the defensive line that's going to be a terror. But, last year's Ohio State-Nebraska game definitely did not go the way Nebraska wanted it to. But that 2018 game, the offense found some success. And I think that'll be kind of the key, is how ready to go is that offense out of the gates. As you mentioned, I think, thinking back to the previous podcast we did, we were both pretty high on that offensive line, and that would be a really big step. So, yeah, you'll take your shot against Ohio State defense that's uber talented as always, but has some pretty big holes to fill. So we'll see. It's tough no matter when and where you get them, but this is probably about the best time.
Well, I think we've over-projected Nebraska here the last 2 years. And I think finally Nebraska I think people have kind of taken their medicine with them, learned, backed off a little bit. But to the point now, I think they're kind of getting a little disrespected. I've listening to a few national radio shows, whether it's Dan Patrick or I was listening to Mel Kiper's show on Saturday morning, driving up to Omaha yesterday, and he didn't even mention Nebraska as like one of the top four in the West Division. I mean, he had Iowa, Wisconsin, Northwestern ahead of him. I'm like, oh boy, like you're kind of forgetting some stuff. So maybe Nebraska can play the disrespecting card and get after him game one.
Yeah, I think that's out there. I think Colin Miller, linebacker, kind of tweeted us against the world the day of the schedule, or the day it was announced they were coming back. And, you can feed off of that for a little bit. I mean, I think there's some real advantages for Nebraska just as a whole. They had guys stick around in the spring semester. Now, they couldn't do supervised workouts. They couldn't really be together, but they were on campus working. We got guys back as early as anyone in the summer. And some of this is, due to kind of pro prospects of their guys right now. There's just a young team. They didn't have any opt-outs. So in whatever fashion a team could be together over these crazy past 6 months, Nebraska has probably been as together as anyone. So some of the kind of power ranking things that come out, like ESPN's FPI, SP Plus, they have Nebraska 25 or 30th, I think, respectively. And that's about where they were in February before everything changed. So I think you're right. People kind of went into this season saying, I'm not letting what happened to me in 2019 happen again in terms of buying into this team too soon. But this year was always kind of set up a little bit better just in terms of experience and returning players for Nebraska than 2019 was.
Right. Yeah, so the schedule was just so much more brutal than it was last year.
Yep.
The schedule was teed up for you to have some success, but they didn't capitalize. So game 2, Wisconsin, we get the Badgers at home again. Nebraska should have won this football game last year. They had them on the ropes. They just too much Jonathan Taylor a little late, but you get Jack Cohn back at quarterback, and you get 9 starters back from the defense. Only allowed about 17 points a game in that Jim Leonard defense. So that's gonna be a tough task.
It is. It's the strange thing about those 2 Nebraska games is I think they averaged more than 8 yards of play both times and lost by multiple scores. can they keep that up? Does Nebraska just, with how Nebraska's scheme matches with Wisconsin's scheme, and I don't know enough about either really to say, like, what is it about that? Or is it just they know, like, hey, these are the kings of the West. Like, if we're going to get where we're going, this is a team we got to beat. Getting that, so in the initial schedule, the 12-game schedule, that was a road game. Getting that flipped to home, was a nice perk of the 10-game conference-only schedule, and it remained as a home game here. Now we'll see how much is home field advantage worth without 90,000 screaming fans. It's still worth something based on the college football I've seen so far this season, but it's probably not quite as heavy as it would have been under normal circumstances.
Right. So now next game they get. Oh, they got to go. Sorry, I was about to say they get Northwestern, but I was thinking they were coming here, but we go to Northwestern. That's usually damn near a home game anyways when Nebraska goes up there, but obviously not too many fans will be in attendance for this one. Northwestern's always a tough team to peg year in, year out. Pat Fitzgerald gets his team to overachieve year in, year out, but they only average 12 almost just under 13 points a game and just shy of 4 yards a play last year in Big Ten. They struggled heavily. Nebraska gets a win by a game-winning field goal against them at home last year, goes through about 4 hands. This one's always tricky. This is always a grind. This is a Pat Fitzgerald king of muddying it up. But hey, well, we're talking about football and another game in Evanston.
Yeah, it's Northwestern. I think is going to be. Well, I thought previously it was going to be pretty good. Now, what does pretty good look like with an 8-game schedule? It might be 3-5. Like, they were not as bad as their record last year, I don't think. I mean, they played elite defense. Their passing numbers were some of the worst I've ever seen from a Power 5 football team. But they bring in Peyton Ramsey, a guy who played a lot of good quarterback for Indiana over the past 3 years. I think that helps them. And they're one of the most experienced teams in the conference. They were really young a year ago. So that one's going to be tough. You just look at the difficulty of these first 4 games for Nebraska. It almost becomes a must win, I think. It's Ohio State, Wisconsin, at Northwestern, Penn State. It's tough. Like, if you could go 2-2 out of that, which is tough to predict right now, but if you could somehow do it, you're probably ranked in the top 25. You're halfway done with your schedule, 500, but you've got a win over at least one really good team and one pretty good team.
Yeah, this is a grind. Those first, I mean, you get the best of the best minus really Michigan. You want the Blue Bloods of the Big Ten. You get 3 out of the 4, bang bang right off the get. November 14th, Saturday, which is going to be a great weekend. That's Masters weekend. So you get Penn State. You get the Nittany Lions at home. Nittany Lions, they've come off 11 victories in 3 out of the last 4 years. I don't think Micah Parsons is coming back. He opted out. Haven't heard much. But again, they are loaded. He does a phenomenal job recruiting. Again, they just replace, plug and play. James Franklin is a guy he was one of those teams that were coaches that were boisterous wanting to play. He's gonna have his squad ready to play when they come to Lincoln.
Yeah, that one will be. So you're almost at the midpoint of this new revamped season at this, which sounds strange, but so it'll be interesting to see where Penn State's at. So they open with Indiana. They get Ohio State right away in week 2. So that'll kind of be an interesting comparison, I guess, by the time we get to this Nebraska-Penn State game. Breaking in a new offensive coordinator, Minnesota's former offensive coordinator. So see how far along they are there. Pat Freiermuth is going to play. He's probably a first-round NFL tight end next year. So that was good. But losing Parsons hurts, and they already had to replace a good chunk of their front 7. I could see, if Nebraska comes out in pretty good shape and ready to play right out of the gates, I could see that being a pretty high-scoring, back-and-forth kind of game. And if you can get that sort of game at home against a team like that, you'll take it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's, again, another tough one. Nebraska come out of this first half 2-2. Sign me up. I would take that in a heartbeat. So then you get Illinois next. Illinois come to Lincoln after that back-and-forth battle in Champaign last year. It was kind of Wandale Robinson's coming out party in that one. Lovie Smith coming back for his fourth year here, but only winning four Big Ten total games in his first 3 years. But he did get back to trying to get back to a bowl game. Brandon Peters, I believe, is coming back, the Michigan transfer. So this is another, if you get beat by Penn State, this is one of those games where you'd like to say Nebraska could, lick its wounds and get a win over Illinois. But it's, again, with this season, it's tough. Illinois is just scrappy, man. They play fast and physical on defense. They beat us up pretty badly across the ball. We've got some big plays late. How do you see this one shake out?
Yeah, Illinois is pretty interesting. So had already lost their top two rushers from last year to graduation, and then Ravon Bonner, their leading returning rusher, opted out. And as far as I've seen so far, it doesn't look likely that he's coming back. Brandon Peters, he was exactly what they needed, I think, for the kind of season that they had last year. Got a really good receiver in Josh Mater-Bebe. Big play guy, likely NFL guy. So they can do some things on offense. I just think in a year where it's hard, I think, to write off almost anybody, certainly in the West. Illinois is probably a deserving seventh. They kind of got there with a little bit of good fortune last year, which you need, especially if you're a program in Illinois spot. You just need some of those bounces to go your way. But I think you're right. They're going to be tough defensively as long as Lovie Smith's there. I'm just not sure they'll be dynamic enough offensively. So that's one. Nebraska's, I think, only back-to-back home games. That's one you got to get.
Yep. So then we go to Iowa, and this one could potentially get changed. So again, Black Friday. There's been some discussions right now. It's slated for that Saturday. But we go back to Iowa after they came in here, and again, Nebraska had a chance to beat them at home last year, couldn't capitalize. But Kirk Ferentz breaking a new quarterback, Spencer Petras. They got a tough schedule. Iowa does as well. But again, you know what you get with Iowa. They play smart. They play physical football. They take care of the football. They really don't beat themselves. It's just, can they score enough points? New quarterback now, and, you lose some good offensive linemen to the NFL. We got a good running back coming back in Tyler Goodson, Indiana transfer, Indiana O-line transfer. So, again, another plug and play for Ferentz in his offensive line. But, Iowa dealt with some off-season, behind-the-scenes, issues with the team chemistry and culture. So it'll be interesting to see how that affects them coming this year. How do you see Iowa shaking out?
Like usual, but hopefully not the same result for Nebraska. I think one part about this could be, everyone likes that Black Friday game. Everyone likes to know who the opponent is every year, and just to have that one game, you're like, okay, well, we know what the Black Friday game is. Getting this game, you won't have played 11 games at that point. You'll have played 5. And I think for the way that Nebraska plays, and Frost kind of alluded to this, just about Iowa's size after they played in 2018 and being shocked at how Nebraska kind of stacked up. But everybody's hurting and kind of limping into that 12th game in a season, of course. And to play against a team like Iowa, where that culture runs so deep. So, they've got some second stringers. They've got some backups in too. But it's just been instilled for 20 years there that we're just going to out-tough people. I think just not having the number of miles on Nebraska's odometer could be the biggest factor there. I know Iowa's coaches really like Petras. You could make them a little bit more dynamic offensively. Bizarrely, Iowa's really struggled to run the ball the last 3 years. So this seems like the kind of year where if they get that running game back up and going, they're going to be probably as good as everybody thinks, but I kind of view that one in toss-up territory.
Yeah, I would have 50-50 game for sure. For me, next we go to West Lafayette, back-to-back road games at Purdue. Weather could be interesting in Indiana this time of year, as it could be anywhere. Normally this time of year, playing indoors or somewhere warm for a bowl game. But Rondell Moore, we haven't, I think he's not opting back in. He's one to jump out rather early. And it's just, you had Elijah Sindelar got hurt late in the year. again, without Rondell Moore, Jeff Brom, I mean, they struggled after having a really good year the year before. It's tough to peg Purdue this year.
It is. I'm a little bit more down on them than I would have been if we'd started probably September 5th. Well, certainly, and a large part of that's due to Rondell Moore.
Yeah.
But also, quarterback, they'll probably be fine. I'm not sure how strong they'll be. They'll find somebody to run the offense. But so you take out Rondell Moore, that's obviously a big loss. But then you have David Bell, another freshman All-American wide receiver. But now, he did great last year without Rondell Moore on the field.
Right.
Now he gets even a little bit more attention, and everyone knows exactly how good he is. And then defensively, George Karlaftis is a stud defensive end. As a true freshman, he was amazing. Really put up numbers that were almost shockingly similar to Chase Young. And I'm not sure how many people noticed outside of Purdue. So you were looking at that, you're like, man, they have three of the best players in the conference. Now they're down one, as we saw with Bob Diaco's first year in Lincoln.
That's right.
That transition to a new defense, the kind of defense he wants to play wasn't seamless by any means. So that's one where I would have Nebraska as a pretty deserving favorite, even on the road.
Yeah, because they just won that game pretty handily last year at Purdue, and they gave that one away big time. So now we go into the last week of the season. And Minnesota. This is kind of one of the teams that we were talking earlier. We're talking about teams that want to play. Minnesota was pretty boisterous that saying they didn't want to play. Their quarterback came out and said, glad Minnesota and the Big Ten's looking out for our safety, so on and so forth. So we'll see how that kind of shakes out with team, energy. PJ Fleck has been very, very quiet in this whole thing, and he's one of the most animated, energetic people you ever meet. And they, with Rashad Bateman, I couldn't think of his name.
Yep.
Trying to get back in. You saw he had opted out, supposedly hired an agent, but he's trying to work back in, get a waiver in this whole situation. We'll see if that happens. Obviously, a definite first-round draft pick, but this is going to be December 12th, last game of the year at Memorial Stadium. Weather could be dicey, or it could be about 65 degrees, that we've seen in the past here. Hopefully, it's more like 65 degrees, so I can go play golf before the game starts or after the game. But Minnesota, this is going to be interesting. Finished 7-6 last year, or excuse me, 7-6 2018, and then got into a really good season last year. They obviously beat the heck out of us. But how do you see Minnesota shaking out?
Yeah, they were a team previously that they were going to be good again, but they probably weren't going to be 11-win good. They just had a lot to replace, and that was and I assume Bateman will get that waiver. I mean, we've already kind of granted everyone eligibility immunity for this year. It seems it'd be really hard to tell a kid, hey, we know why you opted out, but sorry, rules are rules. So I assume they'll get him back, and that'll help. And they still have Tanner Morgan, who's a really good quarterback last year. But the losses were pretty heavy defensively. So if, in a 12-game season, Minnesota's probably 7 or 8 wins. And I think they have a chance to be that, although it's throughout these past couple of months, kind of the Big Ten scuttlebutt, you heard was that Minnesota was one of those teams that maybe hadn't been able to get as much work in, and not, I don't think due to any outbreaks or anything. It's just kind of how they chose to do things. Had heard from some sources that maybe the coaches weren't thrilled with how those players came back in the summer.
Sure.
So then, as you mentioned, there was some public sentiment out there that maybe it's not the best idea to give this season a go. So it's going to be tough. I think one of the great things Fleck has already done, in addition to 11 wins and smoking Auburn in a bowl game last year, is he's quickly moved Minnesota into close to Wisconsin, Iowa territory, and that they're very rarely going to beat themselves. So Nebraska's going to have to go out and do it. Like you said, it could be bitterly cold. Hopefully it's not. And it's kind of it's a mini Iowa at the end of the season a little bit. Hopefully you won't have quite as much wear and tear, but Minnesota can play a pretty similar style, and they bring back all of their offensive line almost, which could help them.
Yeah, so they did. So after finishing 7-6 in 2018, Fleck guided them to their second double-digit win total since 1905. this past year. That's pretty impressive, actually. Now we look at, I mean, this ninth game, we don't obviously know the opponent. So we've dissected these 8 games so far. Win total right now for Nebraska. Looking at this, I'm leaning 4-4.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's probably where I'd be if I had to put money down on it. That's where I'd land. Thursday after, the day after the announcement that the Big Ten was back, we got a question in the mailbag asking for our record, and I'm pretty optimistic on Nebraska. I said 5-3 then, and that was without knowing what the schedule was going to be, but basically assuming it would be this, just in a slightly different order. You got to find a way to steal. Like we said, if you can get 2 of those first 4 games, you're in really good shape. You can't go 0-4, obviously. So I think the season becomes defined by the handful of coin flip games that you've got. And I would almost put Wisconsin coming to Nebraska in week 2 in one of those. So to get to 5-3, you probably got to beat Wisconsin. So yeah, I hate to walk it back, but I'm probably like, if they can go 4-4 against this schedule, that's a pretty good year. And that is almost, and we'll see, context always changes things, but it would be really weird for them to go 4-4 and for me not to feel like they made some pretty good progress.
Yeah. It's just this year it's how you're going to judge this season. I mean, it's unprecedented. Obviously, I mean, we've never dealt with any of this. None of these schools have dealt with this. None of these coaches have never dealt with this. Just up and down. Are we playing? We're not playing. Oh, now we're going to play. The daily testing. I mean, just trying to deal with school and all. I mean, it's going to affect everyone just differently, and it's going to crazy how it shakes out. Who do you think Nebraska? Let's say Nebraska does go 5-3. Who would you expect for them to maybe face in this December 19th Big Ten crossover matchup, potentially in a dome somewhere?
Yeah, 5-3. Wisconsin gets Michigan, but not Ohio State or Penn State. Like, even if Nebraska were to beat Wisconsin, like, it's hard to see Wisconsin also finishing 5-3. 5-3 probably gets you second, maybe more probably third in the division. And I'm guessing that would probably match you up with Michigan, either Michigan or Indiana. Indiana's a really experienced team too, and has kind of stayed out of the headlines in the offseason, which in this offseason is a good thing. So they could be pretty good too. So I think that's the most likely +1 matchup for Nebraska is probably a Michigan or an Indiana.
That'd be awesome. They haven't come out and said, is this going to be, I mean, you're going to have 7 games over this stretch of this weekend. Is there 7? Because you're going to have NFL games going on. There's going to have to be some home games or some of these places going on, right? I'm just trying to do all the math in my head because they were talking about potentially, playing Detroit, Indianapolis, St. Louis, it'd be interesting to see how, would it be kind of cool if they had like they do for NCAA basketball? I mean, you have like an 11 o'clock game, a 2:30 game, and a 7 o'clock game in St. Louis at the old where the Rams played. Then and then Indianapolis, so that weekend's already open. Then you have another 3 games there. Then maybe you'd have 1 more game somewhere else. I mean, it'd be kind of cool if they would do it like that.
Yeah, it would. It'll be interesting to see. I would actually really love that kind of approach where. So, presumably the Big Ten championship game will still be in Indy. Like you've had, it's a different date, but you figure they'd be able to make that work. But then if you chose 2 others, Detroit and St. Louis or Detroit and Minnesota, whatever, you could almost you'd have to start cheating the schedules a week or 2 earlier just to give teams enough layoff. But you could play 3 games on Thursday, 3 games on Friday. So it's just wall-to-wall Big Ten those days. It's you start in Minnesota at 3:30 or whatever, play Big Ten, and then there's another one in Detroit that night. So you'd get at least you'd have to start basically at noon, I guess, if you did 3 games. But you'd kind of get wall-to-wall Big Ten for those 3 days, and it might help you get around the availability of some of those NFL stadiums. It's a chance to do something fun. I think even the idea of giving a team those extra games by then was good. You think about it in a normal season, you'd get some good matchups, but you also might get some like high tension games when you think about, okay, well, these two teams are fourth in the division. Who cares? But they're both 5-7, and one of them gets to go to a bowl game.
Right.
Should they get that sixth win, it becomes pretty interesting.
Yeah. How do you think? I mean, bowl season. How's this going to shake out? Because you have 9 games for the Big Ten. You have obviously 10 for SEC, Big 12. How do you think this shakes out? Do you think you'll have? I mean, I can't imagine there's a full slate of bowl games this year. Do you?
No, I don't think so, because even going up to December 19th, which is when the Big Ten and SEC are scheduled to play their championship, like you'd be into bowl week, basically, if not then, that Monday. Mm-hmm. So it also will depend on, does the Mountain West come back? Does the MAC come back? Those things obviously play into it. So I think the most likely scenario is just a reduced slate of bowl games, maybe only the New Year's 6 bowl games, who knows? Or if some of those other conferences come back, maybe you're talking like late January bowl games where, okay, the holiday bowl's January 18th now because, well, Pac-12 just finished up their season, at the end of or at the start of January. So I think there's some options. And because you're dealing with, a lot of, for some of those smaller games, smaller cities where that's like a big event and they're used to, kind of a whole year is built around it for those bowl committees, like they should be able to adjust if I guess the powers that be decide it's safe to do that and worth doing.
Yeah, it's wild. Try to speculate or see what's going to happen. I mean, you got Pac-12 that comes back. I mean, talks are getting heavy and hot.
Yeah.
I mean, you get that final fifth, Power 5 school conference back, and they start playing, early November. Like their kind of talks are going. I mean, yeah, they could get done early January. And it's just the scheduling and just trying to make it all work. It's just you could have. The crazy thing is, you could have teams be done almost like way the Big Ten did it way back in the day before they had a conference championship. I mean, they got done like the week of Thanksgiving and didn't play their national championship game until potentially a month, 6-7 weeks later. And that's why they'd always look so bad, because it's just so hard to try to recreate that when you have an SEC team that gets another game and, gets some more live reps. But God dang. Hey, we've dealt with crazier stuff, I think, in 2020. I think we can deal with a crazy bowl schedule as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like, hey, whatever you're willing to give me at this point, I'll take it.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, I can't, we've about addressed everything. We finally, we talked, a few months ago, and we thought, football at that time was safe. Now I think we can all agree that this is going to finally freaking happen. And I'm glad, Nebraska, voiced their opinions, and Ohio State voiced their opinions. And I'm glad, the presidents and chancellors reconsidered. But just the frustrating thing is, like, they still could have done this without canceling the season or postponing it in the first place.
Yeah.
You could have still pushed back and buy yourself more time.
Yeah, that's the part that's always going to be kind of tough to square. Like, everyone knows there's legitimate reasons for, like, I mean, there's a reason there's a conversation about, can we play? Do you think we can do it safely? Like, we all get that. But right. Just the decision to be like, to pull the plug right away without even trying to delay the start, or it just would have saved it would have saved a lot of ink. And I'm not talking necessarily just media in that, although there was plenty of that. You talk about state legislators, the letter writing campaigns, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Well, Vogues, are you a chili and cinnamon roll guy?
I am.
Yes. I'm about to go have some after we get done here.
Excellent. It's finally, there's just that hint in the air that it's about that time. I mean, I guess technically by the calendar it's fall starting on Tuesday, but not a moment too soon.
Well, what's the temp down in Tennessee right now?
It's 73, but at 3 o'clock in the afternoon almost. it feels
balmy.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
That's, I mean, we're 77 here in Lincoln.
Oh,
It's a
geez.
little warmer. Yeah. Yeah. Chili and cinnamon roll season, brother.
There we go.
All right, my man. I appreciate it as always. Mr. Brandon Vogel giving us the information, the stats that he is always so good at. And we'll be back with another episode of More to It podcast next week.
A Huda Media Production.